In the unforgiving heat of Fort Benning, Georgia, where dreams are either forged into steel or shattered like glass, a young woman stepped off the bus clutching nothing but a worn duffel bag and secrets that could change everything. The other recruits whispered behind her back, their eyes following her every move with curiosity and doubt. She looked too small, too quiet, too different from the typical soldier in training. They had no idea that beneath her regulation uniform lay ink that told a story of survival, sacrifice, and a past that would make even the toughest drill sergeant pause in respect. What happens when the military's most demanding training ground meets someone who has already faced battles most people never survive? What occurs when assumptions about weakness meet the reality of unbreakable strength? Sometimes the most powerful warriors come in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes a single tattoo can reveal a truth that changes everything. This is the story of how one recruit's hidden past transformed not just her own future, but the entire understanding of what it means to be strong. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt as the government bus wheezed to a stop outside the reception center at Fort Benning. Through the tinted windows, Maria Santos could see the imposing buildings that would become her world for the next 14 weeks. Her stomach churned, but not from the long journey. She had survived worse than basic training, though none of her fellow recruits would ever guess it from looking at her. At barely 5 feet 3 inches and weighing only 115 pounds, Maria looked like she might blow away in the first strong Georgia wind. Her dark hair was already pulled back in a regulation-ready ponytail, and her civilian clothes hung loose on her small frame. The other recruits on the bus were mostly men, with a few women scattered throughout, but none of them looked as out of place as Maria did. "You sure you're in the right place, little girl?" asked Jake Morrison, a farm boy from Iowa who stood 6 feet 4 and had arms like tree trunks. He meant it as a joke, but Maria had heard variations of that question her entire life. She simply nodded and continued looking out the window. The bus doors hissed open, and immediately the Georgia heat hit them like a physical wall. But before anyone could fully process the temperature change, a voice boomed across the reception area like thunder from heaven. "Get off that bus! Move! 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 You have 30 seconds to get your sorry hides on those yellow footprints." Drill Sergeant Michael Torres had been breaking in recruits for 12 years, and he knew exactly how to set the tone from minute one. His voice carried the authority of someone who had earned every stripe on his sleeve the hard way, through deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, through leading soldiers in combat, and through the grinding daily work of turning civilians into warriors. The recruits stumbled off the bus in various states of panic and confusion. Some ran, some walked quickly, and a few, including Maria, moved with calm purpose toward the painted yellow footprints that would mark their first formation as soldiers in training. Maria found her place on the footprints and stood at attention, her posture perfect despite never having had military training. This caught Drill Sergeant Torres's attention immediately. Most recruits had no idea how to stand properly on their first day, but this small woman looked like she had been practicing for months. "Listen up, privates," Torres bellowed, his voice echoing off the nearby buildings. "For the next 14 weeks, I own you. Your thoughts are my thoughts. Your dreams are my dreams. And your nightmares are definitely my nightmares." As he paced in front of the formation, his eyes scanned each recruit, making mental notes about who might be strong, who might be weak, and who might surprise him. When his gaze fell on Maria, he paused for just a fraction of a second. Something about her stillness, her composure in the face of controlled chaos, struck him as unusual. The next several hours were a blur of paperwork, medical examinations, uniform fittings, and countless forms that needed to be filled out in triplicate. Maria moved through the process efficiently, speaking only when spoken to, following every instruction to the letter. Other recruits were already complaining about the heat, the pace, or the constant yelling from the drill sergeants, but Maria remained silent and focused. During the uniform fitting, she had to request the smallest sizes available, and even then, the clothes would need significant alterations. The supply sergeant, a weathered woman named Staff Sergeant Kim Rodriguez, looked at Maria with obvious skepticism. "Honey, are you sure you're ready for this?" Rodriguez asked quietly while fitting Maria's boots. "This isn't summer camp. These boys are going to try to break you, and some of them might succeed." Maria met her eyes steadily. "I'm ready, Staff Sergeant." Something in her voice made Rodriguez take a second look. There was no bravado, no false confidence, just a quiet certainty that spoke of experience beyond her years. Rodriguez had been in the Army long enough to recognize when someone had already been tested by life. That evening, the recruits were assigned to their barracks, long buildings that housed 60 people each in a space designed to eliminate any notion of privacy or personal comfort. Maria was assigned a bottom bunk near the back of the bay, next to her gear locker, where she would store her few possessions for the duration of training. As the recruits settled in for their first night, the conversations naturally turned to backgrounds and reasons for joining. Jake Morrison talked about his family's farm struggling with debt and his hope that military service might provide opportunities for college. Ashley Chun, a computer science graduate from California, spoke about wanting to serve her country and gain leadership experience. David Williams, a former high school football player from Texas, saw the Army as his chance to prove himself after failing to get a college scholarship. When the conversation turned to Maria, she kept her answers short and vague. She was from New Mexico, she said. She wanted to serve. She thought the military would be a good fit for her skills, though she didn't elaborate on what those skills might be. "What did your family think about you joining?" Ashley asked innocently. Maria was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I don't have family." The simple statement hung in the air, creating an uncomfortable silence that none of the other recruits knew how to fill. They were all young people who had families to worry about them, to write letters, to attend their graduation ceremonies if they made it through training. The idea of being completely alone in the world was foreign to most of them. Jake tried to lighten the mood. "Well, you got us now. We're like family, right? All suffering together." Maria smiled slightly, the first real emotion she had shown since arriving. "Thank you. I'd like that." As the lights went out, and the barracks grew quiet except for the sounds of 60 people trying to sleep in an unfamiliar place, Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling. The other recruits were dealing with homesickness, anxiety about the training ahead, or excitement about their new adventure. Maria was thinking about the tattoo hidden beneath her regulation undershirt, and wondering how long she could keep her real story secret. The tattoo was small, barely 3 inches across, positioned over her heart. To anyone who might catch a glimpse of it, it would look like a simple design, perhaps a flower or a decorative pattern. But Maria knew what it really was, and more importantly, she knew what it represented. It was a reminder of the darkest period of her life, but also a symbol of her survival. 3 years earlier, Maria had been living in a very different world. At 17, she was trapped in a human trafficking ring that had stolen her from her family when she was just 14. The tattoo was a brand, a mark of ownership that her captors had forced on all their victims. But Maria had done something that her captors never expected. She had escaped. The escape had taken 2 years of careful planning and incredible courage. Maria had learned to become invisible, to observe everything while appearing to notice nothing. She had studied her captors' routines, memorized the layout of every place they held her, and slowly gathered resources for her eventual freedom. When the opportunity finally came during a transfer between locations, she had taken it. But freedom came with its own challenges. With no family to return to and no legal identity that could be easily verified, Maria had spent months living on the streets, working odd jobs for cash, and slowly rebuilding her life from nothing. She had gotten her GED through a community program, worked multiple jobs to save money, and gradually created a legitimate identity that would allow her to pursue her goals. The military had appealed to her for several reasons. It offered structure, purpose, and the chance to develop skills that would serve her for life. But more than that, it offered her the opportunity to become someone who could protect others, someone who could prevent other people from experiencing what she had gone through. Lying in her bunk that first night, Maria touched the spot over her heart where the tattoo lay hidden. She had come to terms with her past, but she knew that others might not understand. In her experience, people either treated survivors with pity, which she couldn't stand, or with suspicion, as if being a victim somehow made her damaged or unreliable. Neither response was helpful, so Maria had learned to keep her story to herself. The next morning began at 0500 hours with the jarring sound of drill sergeants banging trash can lids together and shouting for everyone to get up and get moving. The recruits stumbled out of their bunks in various states of confusion, trying to remember where they were and what they were supposed to be doing. "You have 4 minutes to get dressed and be outside in formation," Drill Sergeant Torres announced. And I mean 4 minutes, not 4 minutes and 1 second. Maria was dressed and ready in less than 2 minutes, her movements efficient and precise. She had learned long ago that survival often depended on being ready to move quickly, and old habits died hard. While other recruits were still fumbling with their uniforms, Maria was helping Ashley Chun figure out how to properly blouse her pants and showing Jake Morrison the correct way to position his patrol cap. This helpful behavior didn't go unnoticed by the drill sergeants, but they kept their observations to themselves for now. Basic training was designed to reveal character under pressure, and it was still too early to make definitive judgments about any of the recruits. The first week of training was focused on the basics, learning to march in formation, understanding military customs and courtesies, and beginning the physical conditioning that would prepare them for more advanced training. For most recruits, this was a complete shock to their systems. The physical demands, the sleep deprivation, and the constant pressure from the drill sergeants combined to create an environment unlike anything they had experienced. Maria adapted more quickly than most. While other recruits struggled with the early morning wake-ups, she was naturally alert and ready to go. While others complained about the physical training, she kept pace despite her small size and never asked for special consideration. Most importantly, while others cracked under the verbal pressure from the drill sergeants, Maria remained calm and focused. This adaptation didn't make her popular with all of her fellow recruits. Some, particularly a group of men, led by Trevor Walsh, a former college wrestler from Ohio, began to resent what they saw as Maria's attempts to show them up. Walsh was used to being the toughest person in any room, and he didn't appreciate being outperformed by someone half his size. "There's something weird about her," Walsh told his friends during a break from training. "Nobody adapts this fast unless they've done this before. I bet she's lying about her background." His suspicions weren't entirely wrong, but his conclusions were way off base. Maria had indeed done this before, in a sense. She had lived under constant pressure and surveillance for years. She had learned to suppress her emotions and function effectively in hostile environments. The skills that were serving her well in basic training had been developed under circumstances far worse than anything the Army could throw at her. But Walsh didn't know that, and his growing resentment was beginning to influence other recruits who were struggling more than they had expected. The formation of cliques and rivalries was a natural part of the basic training experience, but it could also become destructive if not properly managed. Drill Sergeant Torres was watching these dynamics develop with the experienced eye of someone who had seen it all before. He had noticed Maria's exceptional adaptation, and he had also noticed the growing tension between her and some of the male recruits. More importantly, he had begun to sense that there was more to Maria's story than she was letting on. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way she observed everything while seeming to participate naturally in the group activities, that reminded him of soldiers he had worked with who had seen combat. But that was impossible. Maria's records showed no prior military service, no law enforcement background, nothing that would explain her level of composure and situational awareness. As the first week came to an end, Torres made a mental note to keep a closer eye on Private Santos. In his experience, recruits with hidden depths either became exceptional soldiers or they became problems that needed to be managed. Either way, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. The Friday evening of their first week, the recruits were given a rare hour of free time to write letters home, clean their gear, or just decompress from the intensity of their new lives. While most recruits eagerly wrote letters to family members or called loved ones, Maria sat on her bunk, quietly maintaining her equipment. Ashley Chun approached her tentatively. Over the week, she had developed a genuine respect for Maria's competence and helpfulness, but she had also noticed how isolated Maria seemed from the social aspects of their shared experience. "Do you want to write a letter together?" Ashley asked. I know you said you don't have family, but maybe there's someone back home who would like to hear from you." Maria looked up from the rifle cleaning kit she was organizing. "Thank you for asking, but there really isn't anyone." Ashley sat down on the adjacent bunk. "That must be really hard. I talk to my parents every chance I get. I can't imagine going through this alone." "I'm not alone," Maria said quietly. "I have all of you now." It was a simple statement, but there was something about the way she said it that made Ashley realize that Maria truly valued the connection she was making with her fellow recruits. Despite her reserved nature, despite the barriers she maintained around her personal history, Maria was genuinely invested in their success as a group. "You're really good at this," Ashley observed. "Everything we're learning, you just seem to pick it up naturally. Have you ever thought about what you want to do after basic training?" Maria had thought about it extensively, but her goals were influenced by experiences she couldn't share. "I like to work in something where I can help protect people. Maybe military police or intelligence or security. Something where the skills I'm learning here can make a difference." What she didn't say was that she had very specific ideas about the kinds of people she wanted to protect and the kinds of threats she wanted to fight against. Her experience with human trafficking had shown her a side of the world that most people never see, a shadow economy of exploitation and abuse that thrived on the vulnerability of people who had no one to protect them. As the conversation continued, other recruits gradually joined them, sharing their own hopes and fears about the training ahead. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Maria felt like she was truly part of something larger than herself. These people didn't know her history, but they were accepting her as she was now, and that meant more to her than they could possibly understand. But even as she enjoyed this moment of connection, Maria was aware that her secrets could not remain hidden forever. Basic training was designed to push recruits to their limits, to strip away their civilian identities and rebuild them as soldiers. Eventually, something would happen that would test her in ways that might reveal more about her past than she was prepared to share. That test would come sooner than she expected, and when it did, it would change everything about how the drill sergeants, her fellow recruits, and ultimately the entire base saw her. The tattoo over her heart was not just a reminder of her past. It would become the key to her future, though she didn't know it yet. For now, though, she was content to be Private Santos, a quiet recruit from New Mexico who seemed unusually well adapted to military life. The real story would have to wait for the right moment to be told, and Maria had learned long ago that timing was everything when it came to survival and success. The second week of basic training brought with it the first major physical challenges that would separate the strong from the weak, the determined from the merely hopeful. The Georgia heat had intensified, turning the training grounds into a furnace that tested every recruit's resolve. For Maria Santos, it was the beginning of the period that would ultimately expose the secrets she had worked so hard to keep hidden. Monday morning started with the combat fitness test, a grueling assessment that would become the benchmark for each recruit's physical progress throughout their training. The test consisted of deadlifts, standing power throws with a 10-pound medicine ball, hand-release push-ups, a sprint drag carry sequence, leg tucks, and a 2-mile run. For many recruits, it was their first real taste of military standard physical demands. Drill Sergeant Torres stood in the pre-dawn darkness, watching as his recruits prepared for what many of them didn't realize would be one of the defining moments of their military careers. The combat fitness test wasn't just about physical strength. It was about mental resilience, determination, and the ability to push through pain and exhaustion when everything in your body was screaming at you to quit. "Listen up, privates!" Torres bellowed as the recruits assembled in the humid morning air. "Today we find out who wants to be here and who's just wasting my time. This test will show me who has the heart of a warrior and who should be on the next bus home to mommy." The recruits were divided into groups based on their assigned companies, with each group cycling through the various stations of the fitness test. Maria found herself in the second group, which meant she would spend the first hour watching other recruits attempt the challenges she would soon face herself. What she observed during that hour was revealing. Jake Morrison, despite his impressive size and farm boy strength, struggled with the coordination required for some of the more technical movements. His deadlift was strong, but his form on the hand-release push-ups was sloppy, costing him valuable points. Ashley Chun surprised everyone by excelling at the leg tucks, her computer programmer background having apparently included some serious gym time that none of her fellow recruits had suspected. But it was Trevor Walsh's performance that caught everyone's attention. The former wrestler attacked each station with aggressive intensity, posting scores that put him well above the minimum standards and into the top tier for his age group. His success only reinforced his growing sense of superiority over the other recruits, particularly Maria, whom he continued to view with suspicion and resentment. "Watch and learn, Santos," Walsh called out loudly after completing his sprint drag carry sequence with an impressive time. "This is what real performance looks like." Maria didn't respond to his provocation, but several other recruits noticed the exchange. The tension between Walsh and Maria had been building for 2 weeks, and many of their fellow soldiers were beginning to choose sides in what seemed like an inevitable confrontation. When Maria's group was finally called to begin the test, she approached the first station with the same calm focus that had characterized her approach to everything else in basic training. The deadlift station required recruits to perform 3 repetitions at a weight calculated based on their body weight. For Maria, this meant lifting 140 pounds 3 times with proper form. The weight looked impossibly heavy compared to Maria's small frame, and several recruits from other groups paused their own activities to watch what they assumed would be a struggle or possibly a failure. Even Drill Sergeant Torres found himself paying closer attention than usual, curious to see how this enigmatic recruit would handle the physical demands. Maria approached the barbell with steady hands, positioned her feet properly, and gripped the bar with perfect form. When she lifted, the movement was smooth and controlled, showing none of the strain that most recruits displayed when handling weights that represented such a significant percentage of their body weight. She completed all 3 repetitions without apparent difficulty, her breathing steady and her form textbook perfect. The performance was impressive enough to draw a few quiet comments from the observing drill sergeants, but it was at the hand-release push-up station that Maria first began to truly stand out. The exercise required recruits to lower themselves completely to the ground, lift their hands briefly off the surface, then push back up to the starting position. Most recruits managed between 15 and 25 repetitions before their form began to break down. Maria completed 53 perfect repetitions before the 2-minute time limit expired, a number that put her in the top percentile for her age and gender group. More importantly, her form never wavered, even as her muscles began to fatigue. Each push-up was identical to the one before it, executed with mechanical precision that spoke of extensive training and exceptional body awareness. The sprint drag carry sequence was where Maria's performance became truly extraordinary. The event required recruits to complete a series of tasks that simulated battlefield movements, sprinting 50 meters, dragging a 90-pound sled another 50 meters, carrying 2 40-pound kettlebells laterally for 50 meters, sprinting back to the starting line, and then dragging the sled backward to finish. Most recruits approached this event with visible trepidation. The combination of speed, strength, and endurance required was demanding for anyone, but particularly challenging for smaller recruits who had to move the same weights as their larger counterparts. Maria stepped to the starting line with the same calm demeanor she had shown throughout the test. When the timer started, she exploded in emotion with a speed that surprised everyone watching. Her sprint was smooth and efficient, covering the 50 meters in a time that would have been respectable for much larger recruits. But it was during the sled drag portion that observers began to realize they were witnessing something special. Rather than struggling with a 90-pound sled as most recruits did, Maria moved it with steady, powerful pulls that never slowed or hesitated. Her technique was flawless, utilizing her entire body to generate force rather than relying solely on upper body strength. She completed the drag portion faster than any recruit that day, including Trevor Walsh. The kettlebell carry was equally impressive. While other recruits visibly struggled with the 80 pounds of total weight, often having to set the bells down to rest their grip, Maria carried them the entire distance without pause. Her steps were measured and controlled, her posture upright despite the significant load. By the time she completed the final backward sled drag, a crowd of recruits and drill sergeants had gathered to watch. Maria's total time for the sprint drag carry was not just the best in her company. It was the best time recorded by any recruit at Fort Benning that entire week, male or female, regardless of size or previous athletic experience. The 2-mile run that concluded the fitness test was almost anticlimactic after Maria's previous performances, but it served to confirm what everyone was beginning to suspect. This small, quiet recruit from New Mexico was operating on a completely different level from her peers. She completed the run in 13 minutes and 42 seconds, a time that would have been competitive in many civilian road races. As the recruits gathered for the post-test briefing, the conversations were dominated by Maria's performance. Some recruits expressed genuine admiration for her abilities, while others, particularly those in Trevor Walsh's circle, became more suspicious and resentful. The idea that someone who looked so unremarkable could so thoroughly outperform everyone else challenged their assumptions about strength, ability, and their own prospects for success in the military. Drill Sergeant Torres found himself facing a situation he had rarely encountered in his 12 years of training recruits. He had seen exceptional athletes before, former high school and college competitors who brought impressive physical abilities to basic training. But Maria's performance suggested something beyond natural athletic talent or previous sports experience. Her technique, her composure under pressure, and her apparent familiarity with movements that should have been completely foreign to a new recruit indicated training and experience that weren't reflected in her personnel file. That afternoon, during what was supposed to be a rest period between training events, Torres called Maria aside for a private conversation. They walked to a quiet area behind the barracks where they could speak without being overheard by the other recruits. Private Santos, that was quite a performance this morning, Torres began, his tone more conversational than the aggressive bark he used during formal training sessions. I've been training recruits for over a decade, and I've never seen a first-time performance quite like that. Maria maintained her respectful posture and neutral expression. Thank you, Drill Sergeant. I did my best. Your best was better than most seasoned soldiers I know, Torres continued. Where did you learn to move like that? That wasn't beginner's luck or natural talent. That was trained performance. The question hung in the air between them, and Maria felt the familiar tension that came whenever someone began to probe too deeply into her background. She had prepared for this moment, knowing that exceptional performance would inevitably draw attention and questions. I've always been athletic, Drill Sergeant. I trained on my own before enlisting to make sure I would be ready. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. Maria had indeed trained extensively before enlisting, but that training had been motivated by experiences and goals that she couldn't share. The physical conditioning that served her so well in military training had originally been developed as survival skills, ways to ensure she could protect herself and escape danger if necessary. Torres studied her for a long moment, his experienced eyes searching for tells that would indicate deception or hidden information. Maria's composure never wavered, but something in her stillness, in the way she held herself ready for any eventuality, reminded him more and more of combat veterans he had served with. Private Santos, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Have you ever received any form of military or paramilitary training before enlisting in the Army? No, drill sergeant. This is my first experience with military training. Again, technically true, but incomplete. Maria had never received formal military training, but she had been forced to learn skills that had many of the same practical applications. Situational awareness, physical conditioning, stress management, and the ability to function effectively under pressure had all been necessary for her survival during the darkest period of her life. Torres nodded slowly, still not entirely satisfied, but recognizing that he had pushed as far as he could without more concrete reasons for his suspicions. All right, Private, keep up the good work, but remember that exceptional performance comes with expectations. The other recruits are watching you now, and some of them aren't happy about being shown up. As if to emphasize Torres's point, the conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices from the direction of the barracks. Both Maria and the drill sergeant turned to see a crowd of recruits gathering around what appeared to be some kind of confrontation. They hurried back to find Trevor Walsh standing in the center of a circle of recruits, his face red with anger and his voice carrying clearly across the training area. I'm telling you, there's something she's not telling us. Nobody performs like that without experience. She's either lying about her background, or she's some kind of spy or something. Ashley Chun was attempting to defend Maria, but Walsh's accusations were finding sympathetic ears among recruits who were struggling with their own performance and looking for explanations for their difficulties. Maybe she just trained harder than the rest of us, Ashley argued. That's what we're supposed to be doing anyway. Trained where? Walsh shot back. She says she doesn't have any family, no connections, no background in athletics or military service. So where exactly did she learn to outperform college wrestlers and former football players? It doesn't add up. The crowd of recruits was beginning to take sides, with some supporting Walsh's suspicions and others defending Maria's right to privacy about her background. The situation was escalating toward the kind of confrontation that could seriously disrupt unit cohesion and create lasting divisions within the company. Maria stepped into the circle, her calm presence immediately drawing everyone's attention. She looked directly at Walsh, meeting his hostile gaze without flinching or showing any of the anger that most people would feel when faced with such public accusations. You're right, she said simply. I haven't told you everything about my background. The admission sent a ripple of surprise through the gathered recruits. Even Drill Sergeant Torres found himself leaning forward, curious to hear what Maria would reveal. The truth is, I've had experiences that taught me things I wish I had never needed to learn, Maria continued, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of something deeper. I trained the way I did before coming here because I needed to be strong enough to protect myself and others. I didn't talk about it because those experiences aren't something I like to remember. Walsh sensed that he was on the verge of exposing whatever secret Maria had been hiding, and his aggressive questioning intensified. What kind of experiences? Where did this training happen? Who taught you? Maria was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. She had hoped to complete basic training without having to reveal the details of her past, but Walsh's confrontation was forcing her hand. The other recruits were watching her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, and she could see that her credibility with the group was at stake. I learned because I had to, she said finally. I learned because for 3 years of my life, being strong and fast and aware was the only thing that kept me alive. I learned because I was in a situation where weakness meant death, and I chose to live. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, creating a silence that seemed to stretch forever. The recruits who had been most vocal in their suspicions found themselves struggling to process what they were hearing. Ashley Chen's eyes filled with tears as she began to understand what Maria might have endured. Even Walsh seemed taken aback by the raw honesty in Maria's voice. Drill Sergeant Torres felt a chill of recognition run down his spine. He had heard that tone before in the voices of soldiers who had been through combat, who had seen things that changed them forever. But Maria was too young to be a veteran, too small to have been in law enforcement or security work. What kind of experiences could have taught her the skills she possessed? The tension of the moment was broken by the sound of evening formation being called, requiring all recruits to immediately assemble for the day's final activities. As the group dispersed to prepare for formation, Maria found herself surrounded by fellow recruits who wanted to offer support, but didn't know what to say. Ashley Chin approached her hesitantly. "Maria, you don't have to tell us anything you don't want to. We're your friends either way." "Thank you," Maria replied softly. "Maybe someday I'll be able to tell you the whole story. But not yet." As the recruits prepared for evening formation, word of the confrontation and Maria's partial revelation began to spread throughout the company. By dinner time, every recruit and most of the drill sergeants had heard some version of what had happened, and speculation about Maria's mysterious background was rampant. For her part, Maria felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had revealed more about herself than she had intended, but she had also managed to satisfy some of the curiosity without exposing the full truth. The challenge now would be maintaining that balance while continuing to excel in her training. That night, as the barracks settled into the quiet routine that marked the end of another day in basic training, Maria lay awake thinking about the path that had brought her to this point. 3 years earlier, she could never have imagined that she would be lying in a military bunk, surrounded by people who were beginning to accept her as part of their military family. The tattoo over her heart seemed to pulse with the memory of everything she had survived, everything she had overcome to reach this moment. Soon, that tattoo would become the key to unlocking the full truth of her story. But for now, it remained her secret, a private reminder of how far she had come and how much further she still had to go. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her abilities and resolve. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Maria fell asleep feeling like she truly belonged somewhere, like she was part of something larger than her own survival. The road ahead was still long and difficult, but she was no longer walking it alone. The third week of basic training marked the transition from basic conditioning to advanced military skills training. For the recruits of Charlie Company, this meant their first introduction to weapons training, tactical movements, and the kind of high-stress scenarios that would prepare them for the realities of military service. For Maria Santos, it meant that her exceptional abilities would be tested in new and increasingly public ways. The week began with the M4 carbine familiarization course, where recruits would learn to properly handle, clean, and fire the weapon that would become their primary tool as soldiers. The training took place at one of Fort Benning's many rifle ranges, a sprawling complex of firing positions overlooking targets at various distances. Drill Sergeant Torres stood before the assembled recruits in the pre-dawn darkness, the outline of the rifle range barely visible in the distance. Behind him, a table held several disassembled M4 carbines that would serve as training aids for the day's instruction. "Today you become acquainted with your best friend," Torres announced, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "The M4 carbine is a precision instrument that will keep you alive if you treat it right, and get you killed if you don't." The initial instruction covered the basic components of the weapon, the upper and lower receivers, the bolt carrier group, the charging handle, and the various controls that allow the rifle to function. For most recruits, this was their first experience with military weapons, and the complexity of the information was overwhelming. Maria absorbed the instruction with the same focused attention she had shown throughout her training, but there was something different about her approach to the weapons training. While other recruits fumbled with unfamiliar mechanisms and struggled to remember the sequence of steps required for basic operations, Maria's hands moved with a confidence that suggested familiarity. When the recruits were divided into small groups for hands-on practice, Maria's group was assigned to Drill Sergeant Jennifer Martinez, a combat veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had a reputation for demanding perfection from her trainees. "All right, listen up," Martinez said as she demonstrated the proper way to field strip the M4. "You're going to take this weapon apart and put it back together until you can do it blindfolded. This rifle is your responsibility, and if it doesn't work when you need it, that failure is on you." The recruits watched carefully as Martinez broke the weapon down into its component parts, explaining the function of each piece and the proper sequence for reassembly. When she finished the demonstration, she handed weapons to each member of the group and told them to practice. Most recruits struggled with the unfamiliar mechanisms, dropping small parts or putting components back in the wrong order. Jake Morrison managed to get his bull carrier group stuck halfway into the receiver and needed assistance to remove it without damaging the weapon. Ashley Chun was methodical and careful, but it took her nearly 10 minutes to complete a task that should have taken less than 3. Maria approached her weapon with steady hands and clear focus. She field stripped the M4 in less than 90 seconds, her movements economical and precise. When she reassembled it, every component clicked into place smoothly, and she completed the entire process faster than some of the drill sergeants could have managed. Drill Sergeant Martinez watched this performance with growing interest. Like Torres, she had trained hundreds of recruits over the years, and she had never seen someone with no military background handle weapons with such natural proficiency. "Where did you learn to do that, Private Santos?" Martinez asked, moving closer to examine Maria's work. "I followed the instruction you gave us, Drill Sergeant," Maria replied, maintaining the respectful tone that all recruits used when addressing their trainers. Martinez picked up Maria's weapon and examined it closely. The reassembly was perfect, with every component properly aligned and secured. More importantly, Maria had handled the weapon throughout the process with the kind of safety awareness that usually took weeks to develop. "Do it again," Martinez ordered, "but this time, I want you to explain each step as you go." Maria complied, breaking down the weapon while providing clear, accurate explanations of each component's function and the reasoning behind the proper sequence of operations. Her explanation was more thorough and technically accurate than the instruction many of the recruits had received from their drill sergeants. As word of Maria's weapons proficiency spread throughout the training area, other drill sergeants began to find excuses to observe her performance. By the end of the morning session, a small crowd of instructors had gathered to watch as Maria consistently outperformed not just her fellow recruits, but sometimes the drill sergeants themselves. The afternoon brought live-fire exercises, where recruits would have their first opportunity to actually shoot their assigned weapons. The range was set up with targets at 50, 100, and 200 meters, and recruits would fire from prone, sitting, and standing positions to simulate various combat scenarios. Safety was paramount during live-fire exercises, with multiple range safety officers positioned throughout the area and strict protocols governing every aspect of the training. For most recruits, the combination of live ammunition, strict safety requirements, and the pressure to perform well created a high-stress environment that often led to poor initial performance. Maria was assigned to firing position 12, directly in the middle of the range where her performance would be visible to most of the other recruits and instructors. As she settled into the prone position for her first string of fire, she took several deep breaths and appeared to enter a state of intense concentration. The command came to begin firing, and the range erupted with the sharp crack of multiple M4 carbines firing simultaneously. Most recruits showed the typical signs of new shooters, flinching at the sound of their own weapon, struggling to maintain proper sight alignment, and firing rounds that scattered widely around their targets. Maria's performance was immediately distinguishable from that of her peers. Her shots came in a steady, controlled rhythm that indicated proper breathing and trigger control. More importantly, her rounds were consistently hitting the center of her target with a precision that drew appreciative comments from the range safety officers. After the first firing exercise, targets were pulled, and score to give recruits feedback on their performance. The typical first-time shooter might hit the target with half of their shots, with most of those hits scattered around the outer rings. Experienced shooters could usually group their shots in the center areas of the target, but rarely achieve the kind of precision that professional marksmen demonstrated. When Maria's target was pulled, it showed a group of shots clustered tightly in the center ring, with several shots literally touching each other. The performance was so exceptional that the range safety officer initially thought there might have been a scoring error. Santos, front and center, called Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Williams, the senior marksmanship instructor for the range. Williams was a former Army sniper who had served multiple combat tours and held several military shooting records. She had seen thousands of recruits learn to shoot over the years, and Maria's target represented one of the best first-time performances she had ever witnessed. Maria approached the instruction tower where Williams was reviewing the targets from the first firing exercise. The chief warrant officer held up Maria's target for everyone on the range to see, drawing murmurs of amazement from recruits and instructors alike. Private Santos, this is outstanding shooting for anyone, much less a first-timer, Williams said. Where did you learn to shoot like this? The question that Maria had been dreading was now being asked in front of the entire company, with nowhere to hide and no way to deflect attention from her unusual abilities. She felt the familiar tension that came with having to navigate between truth and the need to protect her privacy. I practiced before enlisting, Chief Warrant Officer, Maria answered. I wanted to be prepared for military training. Williams studied Maria's face, looking for any signs of deception or hidden information. Like the other senior instructors, she had begun to suspect that there was more to Maria's background than her personnel file indicated. What kind of practice? Where did you get access to military weapons for training? Maria felt the weight of dozens of eyes watching her, waiting for an explanation that would satisfy everyone's curiosity about her mysterious abilities. She knew that her next words would either put the questions to rest or intensify the scrutiny she had been hoping to avoid. I didn't use military weapons, she said carefully. I learned with civilian firearms and focused on developing the fundamentals that would transfer to any weapon system. It was another partial truth. Maria had indeed learned to shoot with civilian firearms, but the circumstances of that learning were far more complex and traumatic than she could explain to her current audience. During her captivity, her traffickers had forced her to learn various skills that they believed would make her more valuable to their criminal enterprise. Marksmanship had been one of those skills, taught by associates of her captors who used makeshift ranges in remote locations. What they hadn't anticipated was that Maria would memorize everything about their training methods, their weapon storage locations, and their security procedures. The shooting skills they had forced her to develop became part of her escape plan, one element in the carefully constructed strategy that eventually led to her freedom. Chief Warrant Officer Williams nodded slowly, still not entirely convinced, but recognizing that she wasn't going to get more detailed information from Maria in this public setting. Well, whatever your preparation method was, it was effective. I want you to work with some of our advanced shooters this afternoon. Let's see how you handle more challenging scenarios. The afternoon advanced marksmanship session was normally reserved for recruits who had demonstrated exceptional aptitude during their basic training, and it was unusual for anyone to be invited to participate after just their first day of shooting. The session included rapid-fire exercises, shooting from multiple positions, and engaging targets at extended ranges that tested both marksmanship skills and equipment knowledge. Maria found herself grouped with 3 other recruits who had shown unusual promise, along with 2 drill sergeants who would serve as additional instructors and safety officers. The session began with rapid-fire exercises where participants had to engage multiple targets in sequence within strict time limits. This type of shooting required not just accuracy, but also speed, target transition skills, and the ability to maintain precision under pressure. Most recruits found the time pressure overwhelming, leading to hasty shots and poor accuracy as they struggled to engage all the required targets within the allowed time frame. Maria approached the exercise with the same calm focus she had shown throughout her training. When the timer started, she moved through the target sequence smoothly and efficiently, her shots coming in controlled pairs that consistently found their marks. She completed the course not only within the time limit, but faster than the drill sergeants had expected while maintaining accuracy that would have been impressive in competitive shooting. The extended range portion of the session required participants to engage targets at 300 and 400 meters, distances that tested both marksmanship skills and knowledge of ballistics. At these ranges, factors like wind speed, atmospheric conditions, and proper holdover calculations became critical for accurate shooting. Most advanced shooters required extensive coaching and multiple attempts to consistently hit targets at these ranges. Maria's first shot at the 300-meter target was a center hit, followed by a string of shots that grouped tightly in the target's scoring rings. When she moved to the 400-meter line, her performance remained consistently excellent, drawing admiring comments from the instructors who were observing. By the end of the advanced session, word of Maria's exceptional shooting had spread throughout the base's training community. Senior instructors who had heard about her performance were making excuses to visit the range and observe for themselves. The combination of her physical fitness test scores and her marksmanship abilities was creating a level of attention that Maria found increasingly uncomfortable. That evening, as the recruits gathered for their daily after-action review, the conversations were dominated by discussions of Maria's latest demonstration of exceptional ability. Some recruits expressed genuine admiration and pride that someone from their company was performing at such a high level. Others, particularly those in Trevor Walsh's circle, became more convinced that Maria was hiding something significant about her background. Walsh himself had struggled with the weapons training, his wrestling background providing no advantage when it came to the fine motor control and mental discipline required for accurate shooting. His frustration with his own performance, combined with his growing resentment of Maria's success, was beginning to manifest in increasingly hostile behavior. "There's no way someone learns to shoot like that from civilian practice," Walsh said loudly during the evening meal, making sure his comments carried to nearby tables. "Military snipers don't shoot that well after years of training. She's either lying about her background or there's something else going on." Ashley Chun, who had become one of Maria's closest friends in the company, immediately came to her defense. "Maybe she just has natural talent. Why does it matter anyway? We're all on the same team here." "It matters because we're supposed to be able to trust each other," Walsh replied. "How can we trust someone who won't tell us the truth about who she really is?" The argument was escalating toward another confrontation when Drill Sergeant Torres intervened, his commanding presence immediately bringing the conversation to a halt. "Private Walsh, if you have concerns about another soldier's background, you bring those concerns to me privately," Torres said firmly. "You don't air them in public like some kind of gossip session." Torres had spent the afternoon reviewing Maria's personnel file and making inquiries with the administrative staff about her enlistment process. Everything appeared to be in order, but the combination of her exceptional performance and the questions being raised by other recruits had created a situation that required careful management. "Private Santos, report to my office after evening formation," Torres ordered. "We need to have another conversation about your background and qualifications." As the recruits finished their meal and prepared for evening formation, Maria felt a familiar sense of anxiety that she thought she had left behind. The attention her performance was drawing was exactly what she had hoped to avoid, but her desire to excel in her training had made anonymity impossible. That night, sitting in Drill Sergeant Torres's office, Maria found herself facing the most direct questions she had encountered since enlisting. Torres had arranged for Staff Sergeant Rodriguez to be present as a witness, and both instructors looked at Maria with expressions that indicated they were prepared for a serious conversation. "Private Santos, I'm going to be direct with you," Torres began. "Your performance over the past few weeks has been exceptional in every area we've tested. Physical fitness, weapons proficiency, tactical awareness, stress management. You're performing at levels that are unusual even for recruits with prior military experience. Maria maintained her respectful posture and neutral expression, but internally she was calculating how much she could reveal without exposing the full truth of her past. The problem is that exceptional performance, combined with mysterious background, creates questions that are affecting unit morale, Torres continued. Some of your fellow recruits are beginning to doubt their own abilities because they can't understand how you're achieving what you're achieving. Understand their concerns, Drill Sergeant, Maria replied. I try not to make anyone feel bad about their own performance. I know you have, and I appreciate that. But try not to make people feel bad isn't the same as being honest about who you are and where your abilities come from. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. Maria, we're not trying to embarrass you or force you to reveal things you'd rather keep private. But we need to understand if there are aspects of your background that might be relevant to your military service. The question hung in the air between them, and Maria realized that she had reached a decision point. She could continue to provide partial truths and deflect questions, or she could trust these two soldiers with at least some of the real story of who she was and where she had come from. Drill Sergeant, Staff Sergeant, she began slowly. What I told the other recruits was true. I did have experiences that taught me things I wish I had never needed to learn. Those experiences happened when I was very young, and they involved situations where being strong and capable meant survival. Torres and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Both had served in combat zones and had experience with soldiers who had survived traumatic situations, but they had never encountered anything quite like what they were hearing from Maria. What kind of situations? Rodriguez asked gently. Maria took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change how these two people saw her forever. I was taken when I was 14 years old, kidnapped, and held for 3 years by people who used me for things I don't like to talk about. Everything I know about fighting, about shooting, about being strong enough to survive, I learned it because I had to. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of revelation and understanding. Both drill sergeants had seen enough of the world to recognize the implications of what Maria was telling them, and both felt a mixture of admiration for her survival and anger at what she had endured. How did you get away? Torres asked quietly. I escaped, Maria said simply. It took me 2 years to plan it properly, but eventually I found an opportunity and I took it. After that, I spent time learning to live normally again, getting my education, and figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. Rodriguez reached across the desk and placed a gentle hand on Maria's arm. That must have taken incredible courage and strength. I can understand why you wouldn't want to share that story with everyone. The thing is, Maria continued, I didn't join the army to hide from my past or to forget what happened to me. I joined because I want to make sure other people don't have to go through what I went through. I want to develop the skills to protect people who can't protect themselves. Torres nodded slowly, finally, understanding the source of Maria's exceptional composure and capabilities. Her performance wasn't the result of natural talent or prior military training. It was the result of surviving circumstances that would have broken most people. Maria, thank you for trusting us with that information, he said. I want you to know that what you shared will remain confidential unless you decide otherwise. But I also want you to understand that your experiences, as difficult as they were, have given you skills and perspectives that will make you an exceptional soldier. As Maria left the office that night, she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had revealed more about her past than she had ever intended, but she had also taken the first step toward building the kind of trust and understanding that would be essential for her military career. The tattoo over her heart, still hidden beneath her uniform, remained the one secret she wasn't ready to share. But that secret, too, would soon become part of her story in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The 4th week of basic training brought the field training exercise that would test everything the recruits had learned so far. 4 or 5 days and 4 nights. Charlie Company would live in the field, conducting tactical movements, establishing defensive positions, and operating under conditions that simulated combat deployments. It was during this exercise that Maria Santos would face her greatest challenge yet, and the secret she had carried for so long would finally be revealed in a way that would change everything. The exercise began before dawn on Monday morning, with recruits loading into military trucks that would transport them to a remote training area 30 miles from the main base. Each soldier carried a full combat load of equipment, including weapons, ammunition, food, water, and shelter for the extended field operation. As the convoy of trucks rumbled through the pre-dawn darkness, Maria found herself sitting across from Trevor Walsh, who had maintained his hostile attitude despite the warnings he had received from the drill sergeants. The confined space of the truck made it impossible to avoid confrontation, and Walsh seemed determined to continue his campaign of suspicion and resentment. "I still don't buy your story, Santos," Walsh said in a low voice that wouldn't carry to the truck's other occupants. "Whatever you told Torres and Rodriguez, it doesn't explain everything. Normal people don't develop your kind of skills from bad experiences." Maria didn't respond, but Ashley Chun, who was sitting nearby, immediately came to her friend's defense. "Leave her alone, Walsh. She doesn't owe you any explanations about her personal life. She owes all of us honesty about who she really is," Walsh replied. "We're supposed to be a team, but how can we function as a team when one person is keeping secrets that might affect all of our safety?" The argument was cut short when the trucks arrived at the training area, and the recruits were ordered to disembark and form up for the initial briefing. The field training site was a sprawling area of forest and open ground that had been used to train soldiers for decades, with permanent structures that simulated enemy positions and civilian buildings. Drill Sergeant Torres stood before the assembled company in the gray light of dawn, his expression serious as he prepared to outline the challenging days ahead. Behind him, other instructors were setting up equipment and reviewing maps that would guide the training exercise. "For the next 5 days, this is your world," Torres announced, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "You will eat, sleep, and fight as soldiers. There are no time OUTs, no breaks, and no excuses. Your performance here will determine whether you have what it takes to defend this country." The first day's activities included establishing a base camp, conducting reconnaissance patrols, and learning to operate as small units under field conditions. For most recruits, the transition from the structured environment of the barracks to the chaos and uncertainty of field operations was overwhelming. Maria adapted to the field environment with the same natural ease she had shown throughout her training, but it was her performance as a team leader that truly set her apart. When the recruits were divided into squads for patrol exercises, Maria was appointed as a squad leader based on her demonstrated competence and reliability. Her squad included Ashley Chun, Jake Morrison, and, unfortunately, Trevor Walsh, along with 3 other recruits who had become friends during their weeks of training together. The mix of personalities and skill levels created challenges that would test Maria's leadership abilities under realistic conditions. The first patrol was a reconnaissance mission that required the squad to move through forested terrain, locate and observe a simulated enemy position, and report their findings without being detected. The exercise tested not just individual skills, but the ability to work together effectively under pressure. Maria led the patrol with quiet confidence, using hand signals to communicate and positioning her team members based on their individual strengths and capabilities. Ashley Chin's attention to detail made her an effective observer, while Jake Morrison's size and strength made him ideal for carrying heavy equipment and providing security. The challenge came from Trevor Walsh, who continued to question Maria's decisions and second-guess her leadership throughout the patrol. His disruptive behavior created noise discipline problems and threatened to compromise the mission's success. "Why are we going this way?" Walsh whispered loudly as Maria led the patrol through a particularly dense section of forest. The direct route would be faster and easier. Maria paused the patrol and moved back to address Walsh's concern. The direct route would expose us to observation from the enemy position, she explained patiently. We need to use the terrain to remain concealed while we move into position. How do you know that? Walsh demanded. How do you know so much about tactical movement and concealment? This is supposed to be training for all of us, but you're acting like you've done this before. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Maria realized that Walsh's suspicions were becoming a serious impediment to their team's effectiveness. She made a decision that would have consequences she couldn't fully anticipate. You're right, she said quietly. I have done this before. Not exactly this, but similar things. I've had to move without being seen, observe without being detected, and stay alive in situations where making a mistake meant death. Ashley Chin looked at her friend with new understanding, beginning to piece together the implications of Maria's carefully chosen words. Jake Morrison simply nodded, accepting Maria's admission without judgment. But Walsh's reaction was immediate and hostile. I knew it, he said, his voice rising despite the need for noise discipline. You've been lying to us from the beginning. You have military experience, or law enforcement, or something else that you've been hiding. Maria felt the familiar tension that came with having her past scrutinized, but this time she was also responsible for the safety and success of her team members. Walsh's outburst was attracting attention and potentially compromising their position. Lower your voice, she said firmly. You're endangering the mission and our team. Don't tell me what to do. Walsh shot back, now speaking at normal volume. I'm not taking orders from someone who's been lying about her background. The confrontation was escalating beyond anything that could be managed quietly, and Maria realized that she was facing a leadership crisis that required immediate action. The other members of the squad were watching nervously, unsure how to respond to the conflict between their appointed leader and one of their teammates. Before Maria could respond to Walsh's latest outburst, the sound of approaching footsteps indicated that their argument had attracted the attention of the exercise controllers. Drill Sergeant Martinez appeared through the forest, her expression clearly indicating that she was not pleased with what she was observing. What in the hell is going on here? Martinez demanded, her voice carrying the kind of authority that immediately brought all conversation to a halt. This is supposed to be a stealth patrol, not a social gathering. The squad members snapped to attention, but the damage was already done. Their position had been compromised, their noise discipline had failed, and their unit cohesion had broken down in the middle of a critical training exercise. Private Walsh, explain yourself, Martinez ordered. Walsh saw this as his opportunity to air his grievances about Maria's mysterious background. Drill Sergeant, Private Santos has been lying about her qualifications and experience. She's been leading us using knowledge that she shouldn't have if she's really just a new recruit. Martinez turned her attention to Maria, her expression unreadable. Private Santos, how do you respond to that accusation? Maria felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She was being forced to choose between maintaining her privacy and maintaining her credibility as a leader. The choice would affect not just her own future, but the trust and cohesion of her entire unit. Drill Sergeant, I haven't lied about my military experience because I don't have any military experience, Maria said carefully. But Private Walsh is correct that I've had other experiences that taught me some relevant skills. What kind of experiences? Martinez asked bluntly. The question was the same one that Maria had been avoiding for weeks, but now was being asked in front of her squad members, with the success of their mission hanging in the balance. She realized that half-truths and partial explanations were no longer sufficient. Drill Sergeant, when I was younger, I was held captive by criminals for several years. During that time, I was forced to learn various skills, including some that are relevant to military operations. I escaped and built a new life for myself, but those experiences taught me things that most people my age haven't learned. The revelation created a stunned silence among the squad members. Ashley Chen's eyes filled with tears as she finally understood the source of her friend's mysterious competence. Jake Morrison looked angry, but his anger was directed at the people who had hurt Maria, not at Maria herself. Trevor Walsh's reaction was more complex. The confirmation that Maria had indeed withheld information about her background seemed to vindicate his suspicions, but the nature of that information was far different from what he had expected. Instead of discovering deception or fraud, he had uncovered a story of survival and trauma that made his accusation seem petty and cruel. Drill Sergeant Martinez studied Maria's face, seeing in her expression the same look she had observed in soldiers who had survived combat operations. The pieces of the puzzle that had been confusing the training staff for weeks suddenly fell into place. "Private Santos, thank you for that information," Martinez said formally. "We'll discuss this matter further after the completion of this exercise. For now, I need all of you to focus on your mission." But the revelation had changed the dynamics within the squad in ways that couldn't be easily ignored. Ashley Chun moved closer to Maria, offering silent support through her presence. Jake Morrison positioned himself between Maria and Walsh, clearly indicating his loyalty and protection. Even the other squad members seemed to view Maria differently, with new respect for what she had survived. Walsh found himself increasingly isolated within the group, his hostility now seeming inappropriate and cruel in light of what he had learned. His anger began to transform into something more complex, a mixture of shame for his behavior and confusion about how to respond to the truth he had demanded to hear. The patrol continued toward its objective, but the team's effectiveness had been fundamentally altered by the personal revelations that had occurred. Maria's leadership became more tentative as she struggled with the vulnerability that came from exposing her past. The other team members were distracted by their emotional responses to what they had learned. It was during the final approach to their reconnaissance target that the situation took an unexpected turn. As the squad moved through a particularly dense section of undergrowth, Ashley Chin caught her foot in a hidden root system and fell hard, twisting her ankle with an audible pop that indicated a serious injury. The fall happened at the worst possible moment, when the squad was within sight of their objective but still needed to remain concealed from the exercise controllers who were simulating enemy forces. Ashley's cry of pain had potentially compromised their position, and her injury meant that the squad would need to modify their mission to provide medical assistance. Maria immediately moved to assess Ashley's condition, her training in field medicine allowing her to quickly determine that the ankle was likely fractured and would require immediate evacuation. The injury was serious enough to end Ashley's participation in the field exercise and potentially affect her ability to complete basic training. "We need to call for a medical evacuation," Jake Morrison said, recognizing the severity of Ashley's injury. "Not yet," Maria replied, her mind working through the tactical situation. "If we call for evac now, we'll compromise the mission for all the squads in this area. Let me see if there's another option." What happened next would become the defining moment of Maria's basic training experience, the event that would finally reveal the full extent of her capabilities and the true nature of the secrets she had been carrying. Maria quickly assessed the tactical situation, the terrain features, and the positions of the exercise controllers. She formulated a plan that would allow the squad to complete their reconnaissance mission while simultaneously providing the medical assistance that Ashley needed. Moving with a precision and confidence that surprised even her squad members who had grown accustomed to her competence, Maria positioned the team to provide security while she conducted the reconnaissance herself. Using techniques that went far beyond anything taught in basic military training, she moved through the forest with almost supernatural stealth. The exercise controllers, experienced soldiers who had conducted these training scenarios hundreds of times, never detected Maria's presence as she observed their positions and recorded the information needed to complete the mission. Her movement techniques, her situational awareness, and her ability to gather intelligence while remaining undetected were at a level that impressed even the senior instructors who later reviewed the exercise. While conducting the reconnaissance, Maria also identified a concealed route that would allow the squad to evacuate Ashley without compromising other units' training scenarios. When she returned to her team's position, she had not only completed the assigned mission, but had also solved the medical emergency in a way that demonstrated leadership abilities far beyond her supposed experience level. As the squad prepared to evacuate Ashley using Maria's planned route, Trevor Walsh found himself confronting the reality of what he had been witnessing for weeks. Maria's performance during this crisis had removed any doubt about her exceptional capabilities, but it had also made him realize that his suspicions and hostility had been misplaced and harmful. "Maria," he said quietly as they prepared to move Ashley to safety, "I owe you an apology. I've been wrong about everything, and I'm sorry for the way I've treated you." Maria looked at him for a moment before responding. "Thank you for saying that. I understand why you had questions. I would have questions too if I were in your position." As they carefully moved Ashley toward the evacuation point that Maria had identified, Walsh found himself genuinely curious about Maria's background for the first time, rather than suspicious or resentful. "How did you learn to do what you just did?" he asked. "That wasn't basic military skills. That was something else entirely." Maria was quiet for a moment before answering. "When you're held captive by people who are very good at violence and very careful about security, you learn to observe everything, remember everything, and move without being noticed. It's a matter of survival." The simple statement carried a weight that made Walsh realize how little he understood about the experiences that had shaped Maria's capabilities. His complaints about the physical demands of basic training seemed trivial in comparison to what she had survived. As they reached the evacuation point and transferred Ashley to the medical personnel who would transport her to the base hospital, Maria felt a mixture of relief and concern about how much of her background she had revealed during the crisis. That evening, as the squad settled into their defensive positions for the night, the conversations naturally turned to what had happened during the day's mission. The other recruits in Charlie Company had heard that something significant had occurred during one of the reconnaissance patrols, but the details were still unclear. Maria found herself the center of attention in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable, but she also recognized that the relationships within her squad had fundamentally changed. Ashley's injury had been serious, but not career-ending, and her evacuation had been handled so smoothly that it hadn't affected the training of any other units. More importantly, Maria's leadership during the crisis had demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond what anyone had expected from a new recruit. The drill sergeants who had observed the situation were now asking different questions about Maria's background and her potential future assignments in the Army. As the field exercise continued over the following days, Maria found that her revealed background had actually made her relationships with her fellow recruits stronger rather than more complicated. Instead of viewing her as secretive or potentially deceptive, they now saw her as someone who had survived incredible challenges and chosen to use those experiences to serve others. Trevor Walsh, in particular, seemed determined to make amends for his previous behavior. He became one of Maria's strongest supporters within the company, often defending her against the occasional comment from recruits who hadn't been present during the reconnaissance mission and didn't fully understand what had been revealed. But Maria knew that the most significant revelation was still to come. The partial truth she had shared about her captivity and escape was accurate, but incomplete. The full story, including the meaning of the tattoo that remained hidden over her heart, was more complex and more painful than what she had been able to explain during the crisis in the forest. That full story would soon be revealed in circumstances that no one could have anticipated, and when it would not only complete the picture of who Maria Santos really was, but it would also change how everyone at Fort Benning understood the meaning of strength, survival, and service. The final weeks of basic training arrived with an intensity that none of the recruits had fully anticipated. After months of preparation, conditioning, and skill development, Charlie Company was approaching their final field exercise, graduation ceremony, and assignment to their permanent duty stations. For Maria Santos, these final weeks would bring the moment when her last secret would be revealed, changing not just her own future, but the understanding of everyone who had come to know her story. The revelation came during what should have been a routine medical examination, part of the comprehensive health screening that all recruits underwent before graduation. The examination was conducted by Major Sarah Mitchell, the base's chief medical officer, who had served multiple combat deployments as a field surgeon and had seen more trauma and human suffering than most people could imagine. Maria had successfully avoided any medical situations that might reveal her tattoo throughout her training. But the final examination required a comprehensive physical assessment that would make concealment impossible. As she prepared for the appointment, Maria felt the familiar anxiety that came whenever her carefully maintained privacy was threatened. The examination began routinely enough with standard measurements, tests, and assessments that Maria completed without incident. But when Major Mitchell asked her to remove her undershirt for a cardiovascular examination, Maria felt her heart rate spike with apprehension. "Is there something wrong, Private Santos?" Major Mitchell asked, noticing Maria's hesitation. "No, ma'am. I'm fine," Maria replied, slowly removing her shirt and revealing the small tattoo positioned over her heart. Major Mitchell's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her professional composure wavered for just a moment as she recognized what she was seeing. The tattoo was small and subtle, but to someone with Mitchell's background and experience, its meaning was unmistakable. The design appeared to be a simple pattern of interwoven lines and symbols, but Mitchell had encountered similar markings during her deployments overseas. They were brands used by human trafficking organizations to identify their victims, marking them as property and indicating their status within the criminal hierarchy. "Private Santos," Mitchell said carefully, her voice taking on a gentleness that hadn't been present moments before. "Can you tell me about your tattoo?" Maria felt the walls closing in around her as she realized that her last secret had been discovered.